Why did you decide to homeschool your children? And what do you see as lacking in the current educational system? And what should an ideal educational system look like in your view?
Well, I decided to homeschool my children. Mainly, it was my son, Christopher, who tipped me to that decision. He was complaining about how awful school was. And, sometimes children just like to complain. But I listened to his complaints and I went in and I talked with his teachers. And after making kind of my own assessment of the situation, I agreed with him completely. His assessment was dead on. It was a horrible place. He was, they have these standardized tests that they pass around through the schools here in America where every kid in all the schools in the United States all take the same test so they can be compared as to which schools are doing better jobs and so on. So these standardized tests are given to kids in the whole country. And my son Christopher made something like 98 percentile on, I think, social studies was the subject. And his teacher was complaining about she was going to flunk him in social studies. Well, those facts didn't make up. If he's got the knowledge that he's knows more about social studies for his age than 97% of the kids in the United States, but yet he's not doing well in social studies, what's the problem? And the problem was that the teacher was a fascist, basically. It was all about do what I say, when I say it, how I say it, never criticize me, never tell me I'm wrong. Just a very egotistical kind of fascist attitude. I suspect she did not really like children very much. She's probably been teaching too long. She was an older lady. I think she'd gotten to the point that she resented having to deal with these little bratty children. So she kind of treated them all like that. And he said, it's just, didn't learn anything. He'd try to learn and he'd get a report and he'd go home, get on the computer, look it up in 10 different places, learn all about it and find out that what she wanted him to do was get a map and color it. And he says, get a map and color it. I did that in kindergarten. I'm not interested, not going to do it. So he wouldn't hand it in.
Right.
He just refused to turn into work because he's one of those strong personalities that he doesn't mind bucking the system, and he's willing to accept any punishment they want to give him. Try me and see if you can break me. That's his attitude. He's
Right.
got enough self-esteem for at least 6 kids. He was very strong emotionally and mentally. So he just wasn't getting along in school very well. And he knew a lot more than many of the other children because he loved learning and get on a computer and he learned all sorts of things. And if the teacher would make a mistake, he'd point it out. So he kept getting in trouble with his teacher. So I agreed. I said, this is not a good place for you. So I decided we'd homeschool him. There's only 2 ways that you can homeschool your child. One is for religious reasons. You want to give them a religious education that they can't get in the public school, or you are a certified teacher. Those are the only 2 legal ways to homeschool your kid. So we looked around and found a group of people called Friends. They were part of the Friends organization, which is Quaker, and they had a homeschool. And they were just easy to work with. They talked to us and made sure that Pamela and I were serious about educating our kids, and it wasn't just going to let them run around and not teach them anything. And once they were comfortable with us, they said, just do whatever you want to do. Make a curriculum, teach them things, and every month or 2 months, they'd have to write a little paper and send it in, and they would judge it to see whether that was good enough quality for that grade level. So it was basically their English and their writing skills is what they checked on. And so we did that. And my son was in 7th grade, I think, when we took him out of school. My daughter was in maybe 5th grade. My older daughter had just finished her first year of high school. So we took
Hmm.
them all out at those ages and kept them out till they went to college. And when they
Even
went
though
to,
even though it was only Christopher who had the real issue with the school, right? So, but based on that, you decided to take them all out,
yes,
or
I took them all
okay.
out because there was other reasons for the girls. So I took Christopher out because he just wasn't being challenged. He was
Hmm.
bright. He was in the gifted program. He had an IQ of, 145 or something like that. And he just was a very smart boy who wasn't being challenged at all. He wanted to learn stuff and they wanted him to color maps, that sort of thing. So he just was done with it. He doesn't, he didn't, I shouldn't say it doesn't because he's gotten over most of that now, but he didn't at the time suffer ignorance very, very easily,
Hmm.
so he was pretty arrogant as a little kid. He was very smart and knew it. So arrogance was part of his problem as well. So anyway, that the girls were basically turning into they had little girl cliques they hung out with, and all the girl cliques would kind of compete with each other and fight with each other, and it was constantly she said this and he said it was a social thing. The idea that you might learn something was beside the point. You went to school as a social thing.
Right.
Learning, you just sit there in class and learn as little as you could. It wasn't the environment wasn't that learning was fun, learning was good, learning should be enjoyable. The environment was that learning was work and it was a pain and it didn't seem to have any value. So I thought that was really a bad attitude to teach children. So I took them out too. Now my son was just thrilled to get out of that school. My daughters weren't so thrilled because they didn't have all their little friends to hang out with all day.
Yes.
So they were not too thrilled about it, but they came along anyway. And for the first probably 4 or 5 months, they fought with each other. They were home and they tended to fight with each other because they hadn't really been brothers and sisters so much as they identified with their group of peers at school. They hung out and played and connected with their peers at school and didn't actually interact that much with each other because there were some years between them, so they didn't do that. But now, after about 5 months, they got over all of that peer click pressure thing. They got over that and they started working together and helping each other out and solving each other's problems and so on. And then after that, they became very, very close and worked with each other very well. My wife and I took all of them out of school early, and you can do that when you homeschool. We said, well, we've got an educational trip we're going to take. We're going to drive for a month. It could take a month and just drive around in the United States and see the sights. The school said, fine, you teach them as you go. So we
Yeah.
did, drove around. So we had these probably 13, 12, and an 11. My kids were all right, very close to, in ages. They weren't that different in age. They were in different grades. But anyway, so we drove around for a month in a van. Never an argument, never a fuss, never a fight. They were all they were all buds. They all looked out for each other. So it was just really nice that we became a family again, and that the parents were no longer the enemy. The parents were the people who helped them, gave them guidance.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful.
it just changed everything. When they were in school, the grown-ups were the enemies. They were like in a prison. They had to go to school. So they were like inmates. And while they were there, they formed up these gangs and cliques. And that was the whole social reason that they went, is because of the cliques and things that they had. These are the girls, mostly, not my son. And the attitude toward adults was you never told them anything because they'd fuss and they'd complain and they'd try to run your life, and you didn't want them to run your life because you knew everything. At that age, you were already infinitely wise and had all the answers. So parents were just kind of a dumb necessity that you had to put up with. It was kind of the attitude that the kids had. And after I took them out of that environment, everything just changed. They started to think their parents were pretty cool, that we knew a lot. They appreciated the guidance that we could give them. They listened to us. Their behavior got better. They were a lot calmer, less hyper. Everything improved.
And so you were teaching them all the main subjects like
Yeah,
maths and history
yeah,
and
I taught them everything. And
okay.
it was not hard. I mean, it's pretty simple to teach kids. And it turned out that if we actually worked for half a day, they would learn a lot more than they did in all day at school.
Yeah,
So it
that's
didn't
what I would
take much.
expect.
They could have a good time. So they would read things that they wanted to read, and do the things they wanted to do. I had some basic things that they had to be literate. They had to be good writers. They had to be, they had to speak well, write well. They needed basic math, but they didn't have to do advanced math if they didn't want to. And they needed biology and chemistry and all the basic sciences. They needed some literature. So we gave them everything. And basically the textbooks I bought from a college bookstore. So we took freshman college books mostly for the time that they were in their homeschool. They could read those and deal with them. So the time they went to college, it was like we've already done all this.
Wow. Yeah.
They found the first year of college was a breeze. So all of them did very well in college because it just wasn't that hard. They knew how to think. They knew how to study. They had learned all that stuff that I don't think most of the high school students never did learn before they went to college. Matter of fact, my daughter had a friend that she had made in her freshman year, and she kept that friend all the way through, even though he was in public school and she was in private. And she volunteered my services in helping to proofread a senior paper that he wrote. And he made good grades. He was an A/B student in high school, and he handed me this paper, and it looked like a 7-year-old had written it. My kids just were years ahead of him in doing that. I didn't realize what the difference would be, but that was when my daughter was it was her senior year too, and this boy, and I realized how much better an education they had gotten than the kids that were in the public schools.
And
So
so how did you deal with the social aspect of this? Because a lot of people would argue that during the elementary school and high school years, that's also when children develop themselves socially.
yeah,
Whereas
it
if you
is.
if you would homeschool them, then they would tend to not have as many opportunities to socialize.
Yeah, I can easily address that. That is just not true. The problem with the public schools is they get too much socialization, way more than they need. The socialization becomes the whole reason for going to school. My kids, and because of the town in which I live has lots of things for kids. So they were on soccer teams, they went to dance classes, they were on all sorts of, they had sports, they had little sports things that, the city league would have these teams that would play. So they were on all these teams. And whenever they were on a team, they were around a whole bunch of kids. So they'd play soccer on a soccer team and they made friends and they had friends come over. And every once in a while, all the homeschools would get together so the homeschool kids could meet each other from the homeschooling. That was the thing they did about once every other month. So they got to meet people, and they had friends from places that otherwise they would never have met had it just been the kids in their neighborhood in their school. So they had plenty of friends. They'd go to their houses. Their friends would come and stay the night at our houses, when they got that old. And they had all the social life that they needed as children. But to stick a whole bunch of kids together in a school all day long, and with the teachers are are the dictators in charge, and the kids are the inmates trying to live outside the rules as best they can. That was just a really bad environment. It socially was terrible. It was teaching them all the wrong things. In the public schools, the things that were cool were the things that were dysfunctional. The things that were cool in those years were kind of the gangster attitudes, that kind of stuff. Bad language, all of that stuff was cool because that's the stuff that the adults didn't like. So you do that because that was
Right.
kind of like getting even for being incarcerated in a school. You do these things. So the bad habits and the bad language was kind of a badge of honor amongst the inmates at school. Whereas at the homeschool, it wasn't like that at all. So, my kids took dance classes. They took, like I said, lots of sports. They did gymnastics. They did swimming, the swim team. We were members of the Y, so they had that all the Y MCA facilities, and so they had plenty of socialization and plenty of friends. But it wasn't inmates at the public school kind of environment, us against
Yeah.
the adults kind of thing. So
Yeah.
the attitude change was just marvelous. Kids got along and they appreciated their parents more. They were a lot nicer and kinder and more willing to talk to us than they were before. It really was like that. The parents and the adults were the enemy. You need them because they pay your way, but you talk to them as little as possible and never tell them anything. It was that kind of an attitude, just like inmates. Don't tell the guards anything. They're there, but so the difference. My daughter and I got a lot closer, where she would talk to me about anything going on in her life, because she realized I wasn't going to judge her. I wasn't going to tell her that's wrong. Don't do that. Do this, which is what happened in school. The teachers would judge them and tell them what they should do and what they shouldn't do, try to overrun their free will, and treated them like they were inmates, and they had to do what they were told. So she realized that we weren't like that. We were interested in her ideas and her opinions and what she thought, and then she became interested in our ideas and opinions and what we thought, and it actually was a sharing of things when she got to be like 15, 16, 17. She was friends with her parents, and she could discuss kind of anything with us. Whereas when she was in the public school, she wouldn't say anything much. Well, what happened today in school? Nothing. Did you learn anything? No. Did you
Right.
have fun? No. It's just, that's it. You couldn't beat anything out of them. They were just non-communicative. So
Yes.
all that changed. It was just a tremendous advantage for them and for us to homeschool the kids. And I enjoyed it. I just spent all day, mostly during that period, I was writing MBT. Those were the 5 years that I was writing MBT. So I just would sit there, write MBT, and I'd work 2 days a week. I'd work 2 10-hour days, which gave me half time, 20 hours a week.
Right.
And I have 2 days at work, and then 5 days without work. So they had 2 days where they had to get along by themselves. But they were teenagers by then, and after, like I say, after 5 months or so, getting along by themselves was good. They had no trouble with that. So
Right. Yeah.
it worked out really very, very well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Tom, and very fascinating. So you found this amazing solution that worked out really well. How would you say how would you change the system if you could, like if you were in charge? What would a low entropy education system look like?
I'm not sure the system we have is changeable, but one the thing that I would like would be more along the lines of, say, a Montessori school. I don't know
Oh,
if you're
yes.
familiar with Montessori or not, but
Yes.
basically each kid is allowed to develop at his own speed and his own way. You give them tools and encouragement and let them develop. So it's not like a class of 30 people and they all have to do the same thing at the same time. So it's not regimented. It's not you know, the teachers are not the police. You know, the teachers are just teachers. They're there to help, and the students have assignments, things to do, things to learn, things to practice, and the teachers are there to help. They're not there to police. Oh, right, I've given you your orders. Now, fulfill your orders, and I will police you to make sure you do everything the way I want you to. That was kind of the public school attitude, which is horrible for education. I mean, that's you don't learn in that kind of an environment. So
Right.
anyway, I would have like a Montessori school, and I would have probably no more than I don't know, 5 or 10 kids in a class, probably 5, 6, 7 kids together in a class. And I tried to get the kids of similar interests in those classes because then it would be more dynamic. And I would tend to not have so many written tests. I have almost all oral tests because I didn't really care whether my children memorized anything or not. Memorizing facts was not important. Understanding was important. And understanding well enough that if they needed a fact, they know where to find it and they could look it up. Why the things happened the way they did, what choices were made, and why those choices were made. And they learned a lot through that because they could see that most of the problems in the world through history had to do with people with very low quality of consciousness, making poor self-centered decisions, control, power, force, and they could see the bigger picture of what was going on and how history was important, how what you're doing, how what you did over the last 2 decades, how that affects what you can do over the next 2 decades, and that it was a growing, evolving culture and situation, but it evolves slowly. So I tried to do history from the viewpoint of what does it mean? What can you learn from it? How can you personally make better choices? Because you've seen all these choices that other people have made in tight situations and then how those choices worked out. And how does that help you make choices? So that was the way I approached history. Mathematics, I had them understand mathematics, not get right answers. We didn't do plug and chug. Here's 100 multiplication problems. Work them all out. I call that plug and chug. You just put in the numbers and get out answers, and the answers are right or wrong. And we didn't do that. It was, why do you do it this way? What does it mean? What is multiplication? Oh, it's just a notation for, adding certain numbers of groups. So I
Okay.
didn't teach them the way normal schools taught them. It wasn't about memory. It was about understanding and what could you learn from history and get a sense of how history has unfolded and why it unfolded that way, and the nature of we humans and our institutions and that kind of thing. What's driving the behavior? What's driving the choices? So they got that kind of a sense of history as opposed to memorize who did what at what year, that kind of thing. I thought was irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. It's what was the significance of that act, and why does that act matter, and how did it affect the future, and how did it become the choice driven from the past? What was the logical track there? So that was the idea, and all of my tests were verbal. I wanted to know, did they understand, not could they repeat facts. So I didn't have any written tests. I just had verbal tests. And all of my questions were questions of, did they really understand the material and the significance of the material?
Yes.
And if they didn't, then I explained it to them again. And then I might give them another test until I thought that they understood it well enough to go on to the next thing. So it was that it's not like take a test, pass or fail, and that's it, we go on. They would continue to study until they did understand it. And then we go on to the next thing. But I also was very lax. I let my son got interested in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. And there's like, at that time, there was like 12 books. It went all the way up to like 15 eventually, but he would just wanted to read them. So they all were already out. So he spent like 2 or 3 weeks just reading, sitting in his room, reading that book one after another, after another, after another. And I gave him permission, just go read. Read for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, however it takes. Read the whole series until you're done. And he did. And when he came out, the speed at which he could read with good comprehension probably tripled because he
Right.
spent all that intensive time reading, and he got faster and faster and better comprehension. So made a huge improvement in his reading just because it was intensive. You know, that's all he did for months, for a month, was just read. And
Yeah.
so I
And
let
just
them do that kind of thing because that's what he wanted to do. That was something that interested him. And so go do it. You can learn from it. You know, it's not, we were not regimented in my homeschool. They could do what interested them pretty much as long as they got the basics. You know, they had to do all the basic things. But other than that, if they wanted to take a month off to read, fine. Take a month off to read. Do do things because at that at that age, no matter what they learn, no matter what they're reading, doesn't matter. It's the ability to take written stuff and turn it into thoughts in your head and do that
yes.
efficiently. That's what's important. Not that they read classic books or something. Let them read something that was entertaining and engaging for them. And then he developed this passion for reading. He loved to read. Well, how many kids these days love to read? You know, it's, yeah, because he got to read what he wanted to read, not what he was told to read. So I'd say
Right.
the perfect school would be one that works with the kids' interests and works with the kids' understanding. And you can't do that if you got a class of 30 people. You know, that won't work. You know, 5 people is probably enough. So you need more people, and you need people who really do want to teach and like kids and are not part of a here's the curriculum. We're going to teach this way from this book and require these, you know, this homework, and it's all laid out before the teacher ever gets it. The teacher just follows orders.
Right.
It's all done at the Board of Education or someplace and tells the teacher, here's the text, here's the things, here's your workbook, here's your syllabus. Just go do it. Spoon
Mm.
feed it to the kid, you know, and give them tests to see whether they remember it or not. And that's just not a good education. They come out uneducated. They can read, they can write, but they don't understand anything. They can't think. You know, they don't have any critical sense of how anything works.
Yes.
That would be how I would change schools. But I think kids staying home and being taught by their parents is the optimal way because that will bring the kids and the parents and the family. That'll create a strong family unit if it's done well.
To do it as we do now is like we put a bunch of children all with the same age together in one building, whereas maybe there's also other ways of doing it where different ages get mixed together, and maybe
Mm.
they work together with the adults, and there's more variety instead of, you know, putting a bunch of teenagers all together, which can lead
Yeah,
to some very dysfunctional dynamics.
right. Too much socialization in peer groups. I would agree.
Yeah. But we can talk about this also next time.
Yeah.
I think
Well, that's the
I think
last question: how to raise our children in a low-entropy environment without them becoming naive and unprepared. I found that my homeschool made them less naive and
mm,
more prepared. Just because they're in homeschool doesn't make them naive. My children learned to understand what was going on in the world, how people were, what the risks and dangers were, how things were. They knew about the ugly side as well as the nice side. It was a part of life. So, you know, and we talk about current events. We talk about things that were going on in the world and why and so on. So they weren't naive at all. I would say they were less naive than the kids that went to the public school, which was memorize and regurgitate. That leaves you naive. So they were well acquainted with the dysfunction in the world and why it was like that and how to be careful and how to deal with it.
Right.
So I think they were more prepared to deal with the dysfunction than had they gone to public school. So I think all the things that people say about homeschooling, oh, your kids won't be fit for life and they don't socialize enough, and all of that's just wrong. That's parents who don't want to take the time to sit down and educate their children. Their parents are busy. Both parents have to work to make ends meet. They need to take their kid and put them someplace where somebody else will take care of them during the day. And they don't want to consider staying home and they don't have the patience for it. Then they would do just like the schools. They would demand that you do this and you do that and memorize it. And I think the parents could do a bad job as well as as bad a job as the teachers. So homeschool is not like the thing that makes it work. The thing that makes it work is good teachers that really care. And in public school, good teachers that really care would probably make a big difference too. But mostly you don't have good teachers that really care. I think the homeschool made them less naive and more aware of the world and how it is than the public school. The public school, they were a gang. They were a gang of same age, kids. And their understanding was at about that kiddie gang level. Their understanding of the world was about at that level. Whereas in my homeschool, they talked to adults and got adult views. Adult views were not pushed on them, nor were they expected to believe adult views. They were supposed to make up their own minds. But they were exposed to them and had conversations with adults about the world and what was going on, why it was going on, because adults were no longer the enemy and the parents were no longer stupid.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.